In April of 1963, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested and confined to the city jail in Birmingham, Alabama. He'd gone to the city to support protests and demonstrations against injustices taking place against people of color. There were 8 members of the local clergy, all Christian ministers except for one who was a Jewish rabbi. And collectively, they had made a statement about Dr. King's visit and activities. And they referred to them as being unwise and untimely. They did not like the public demonstrations, the civil disobedience, and the breaking of some laws. They preferred quieter, behind closed doors, behind the scenes negotiations and talks with city leaders and newly elected politicians at that time. And they felt that Dr. King could have waited a while before taking the action that he did. So when Dr. King became aware of this statement while sitting in jail, he crafted what has become his well-known letter from a Birmingham jail, addressed and sent to these 8 individuals. And in it, he responded to their concerns. And he did so from the perspective of there having been far too much time already passed without any changes being effected, that it had become very clear that prodding and prodding and prodding again the local and state officials was necessary, that waiting for equalities to be given was no longer an option. They had to be demanded. And about 2/3 of the way through what is a 23-page typed letter, he turned his focus to religious leaders in general and also to the Christian church. He felt there was a very strong correlation between the Gospels and Jesus's teachings and the social action that he was leading. And he wasn't happy with what he had been witnessing. He wrote, "In spite of my shattered dreams of the past, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious community and leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause. I had hoped that each of you would understand. But again, I have been disappointed." And then he offered this about the church entity itself. He says, "So here we are, moving toward the exit of the 20th century, with a religious community largely adjusted to the status quo, standing as a taillight behind other community agencies rather than a headlight leading men to higher levels of justice. There was a time when the church was very powerful. It was during that early period when the early Christians rejoiced when they were deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Things are different now. The contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often vocal sanction of things as they are." It's been nearly 60 years since that letter was written, and yet at times it feels as if it might have been written just a few weeks ago. So today we're going to look a bit more closely at the change in social structure that's occurred in the Christian church and how it can again be a more powerful presence in society as a whole. And since church is actually you and me, those who gather together in specific, spiritual community together, the change over the years and the opportunities for the present both refer to us. So right from the start, let me say that when I was putting this lesson together, I started to hear some conversations replaying in my head from my upbringing. Conversations that I heard that said that politics and religion weren't things to talk about more things to talk about outside the home, outside of the family. And then there were conversations coming back into my mind from more recent years, conversations about talking or not talking about politics in church. Unity has long struggled in taking public stands on certain, issues or causes, wanting to be, inclusive of multiple perspectives. And of course, we want to be, respectful of individual political beliefs. I get that. I get that. But when we're talking about matters of just basic values, basic norms, basic human rights, should there be multiple perspectives on that? But it seems that no matter what gets into or is brought into a conversation today, it soon becomes politicized. And today that means that we become even more polarized and separated from one another as a people. And thus 57 years after Birmingham, we're still trying to figure out how to agree on just the basics of what I'll call the little c Christian behavior and the application of some of these basic and equal rights to all people. And so with an intention of being inclusive, I'm going to offer some thoughts about politics and the church. And it's not going to be driven by political party. It's not going to be based on any statement that unity, has as a whole has officially made or stance it has taken. It's going to be based on history. History provided through some writings of Richard Rohr, and then expounded upon by some modern day, theologians and leaders as to how we can look at some of the history of Jesus and bring the two together, church and politics, in positive, respectful, and very profound ways. So I believe that there is a vast majority of people all around the world, whether it's in this city, our country, around the world, that would agree that politics is not an easy topic to talk about, at least not politely for very long. And sometimes I think the same is true about religion. Politics, I know that I don't know nearly, I'm at the surface level probably, because politics is very complex. It is a very complex system. And both it and religion are so personal, to each of us that sometimes neither one is comfortable to talk about outside the core family, out in the public. And some might even say that it is inappropriate, to do so. But Richard Rohr points out something that I think we are all very aware of. And that is that while separation of church and state is a very important protection for all religions, it does not mean that we as people of faith shouldn't engage in our civic duties and in the political process. We hear this being said about clergy. We hear it said about houses of worship, where we hear it now being said today to athletes and entertainers and people who just have a large platform due to their vocation or some other, position in their life. What we're hearing is stay out of politics. Just preach your sermon, just go to church, just go play your sport, go make your movie, go write your songs, stay out of politics. And I dare say that it's our human fears that are behind that kind of commentary. Because the more people that speak, the more likely we're going to hear different thoughts, different perspectives. And if someone's thinking is dualistic, where there is either a right or a wrong to anything, then hearing a perspective that is not absolutely 100% in agreement with theirs can certainly bring up some fears. It can be very scary to feel yourself trying to get nudged outside of a comfort zone. It can be very scary to open up to learning something new, hearing and learning something different from anything that you have ever heard before, and to think that you might be, quote unquote, wrong. So let's look at the church and the politics of old and how it served to create the weakness of the church that Dr. King wrote about. In the first 2,000 years of Christianity, its teachings and its beliefs of morality, have really been kept quiet. They've been kept mostly private, very personal. It was all about just getting to that afterlife place of heaven. Christianity did not have much of a direct implication on things in the public forum, our overall economic and social and political lives. For most, politics and religion have remained separated from each other. And Richard Rohr noted that this split that was created between or by this separation created two worlds. And one was referred to as the inner world, and the other the outer world. And you were either in one or the other. And he notes that history tells us that the inhabitants of the inner world, well, that was the religious people, the people of faith. And then the outer world, that was reserved for the professionals, the workers, the scientists, the politicians. And Richard offers now this is all catching up with us, as even the inner world has largely been overtaken by psychology, art, literature, self-help. Fewer and fewer people now expect religion to have anything to say about either the inner or outer worlds. So what did we miss? What did we overlook in our inner world? Rohr believes we just didn't go in deeply enough. And therefore, we weren't very good about talking about the inner world with those around us. He said that, if we don't go deep and in, we can't go far and wide. So in other words, if we don't find matters of substance to share, not many are going to listen to us for long, if at all. For example, we don't have to go very deep within to write a creed or a doctrine, to create a ritual, to establish a set of rules to follow in a church. Unless you connect and communicate in ways in which someone can use those items to access the deepest desires of their hearts, apply them in ways that speak to their life as it is today, to issues at play today, then they're not going to have a lasting impact or effect, and people will turn away from them, and they will turn away from the church. Christianity, in its traditional form, has not fared very well in connecting the inner with the outer because of this lack of depth. It's been very disconnected from those Rohr refers to as the authentically political. And by that, he said he means all God's people, the public forum. The only two issues Christianity has really had anything to say about, and then presented those thoughts with great certitude, have been abortion and homosexuality. And neither of those topics can be found in any scriptural stories or teachings attributed to Jesus. So here's the takeaway from the old politics as we consider something new for today. Separation of religion and politics does not work well, and the separation does not have to be. In fact, some would say that there's no such thing as being non-political. For Richard Rohr, he believes that everything we say, everything we do, does one of two things. It either affirms the status quo or it critiques the status quo. And when we apply that to our desire to bring politics and religion together in peaceful and public discourse and action, we need to really remember, be cognizant of something that has been right in front of our face once again with the more recent uprisings around the injustices that we have. And that is to know that to say nothing is to say something. To say nothing is to say something, because it is to agree, regardless of whatever situation or circumstance is in front of us. It's to agree that everything is okay, just as it is. That's what we're doing if we say nothing. So we've got to continue to go deeper and deeper within so that we will know what is ours to do. And we will know the words that are ours to speak. And we will know how to make our political choices from an embodiment of our spirituality. So let's look at that a little bit closer. How do we link together our roles as Christians and citizens? You might be familiar with Benedictine sister Joan Chittister. She's over the last 30 years, she has been considered to be a visionary spiritual voice. And she's a very outspoken advocate for things like justice and peace and equality. And she had a few things to say about this in early 2019 about our Christian obligation in politics. And she spoke of a crossover moment. And she defined that as something that occurs in every life, after which a person will never be the same again. She saw it as a moment of challenge that comes into our life that just almost on a dime shifts us onto a different pathway than the one that we had been on. And she called it the pathway of purpose, the path of integrity, the path of transcendence that lifts us, heart, mind, and soul, above the pitiable level of the comfortable and the mundane. And she felt that we had arrived at such a moment in time as a culture, and as it applied to being the best, least superficial, and most serious Christian, as well as a citizen. And the linking together of those two roles is done within the confines of our own hearts. We're to view politics not as something that exists for itself, but rather as an instrument of social good, an instrument of human development. Sister Joan offered that politics is meant to be the right arm of those souls who have melted into God. It is to be the living breath of those who say they are religious people and patriotic citizens, a link to personal faith. So where can we find this link in the history of Jesus and the democracy of our country today? Well, Jesus taught that we should care for the widows and children, which links to our commitment today to provide a living wage for families under stress. He also taught about the preciousness of life, the preciousness of this planet Earth, which links to today's calls for environmental awareness, and practices that are in support of the sustainability of the planet. Jesus taught about God's love for all of us, that physical challenges or illnesses are not punishments against anybody. And that love is what links to today's moral obligation to make healthcare available to all, to have social services available to all, and not just some. Politics, our system of democracy, shines a light on the courage of the Samaritan who reached out to the foreigner, and links to our country opening its arms years ago to an immigrant world. So much of all those things are just about values and moral teachings that you find in every major world religion and spiritual tradition. And Sister Joan offers for our consideration that our system of democracy is the strength of the link between religion and politics that will determine both the quality of our politics and the authenticity of our religion. Now, I think our link right now, is not at its strongest. I mentioned near the very start of this lesson how polarized we as a citizenry are in this country, how separated we have become in many different ways, and how even the norms of basic morals and values and behaviors have become politicized. So in order for that to change, we have to be willing to change, to make that link stronger once again. And it's a willingness for change that applies to everybody, not just some, because no one person has all the answers. No one person can possibly see all the different perspectives. Peter Armstrong is a seminarian, at Yale Divinity School. And he wrote an article on this idea of personal change and based his thoughts on what Jesus modeled. He likened our road to change to that of the road Jesus traveled and what happened as he did. See, Jesus grew into his ministry by going from town to town to town, talking to everyone, interacting with everyone, listening to their stories, creating relationships, and offering his teachings as well. And he offered them the opportunity to hear something different. He showed them ways in which they could live differently, how they could have different perspectives on a relationship with their God. And all of this with the underlying intention of bringing out the very best of everyone and guiding them to see the oneness that they shared with their human family. And if they were willing to change, their lives were very often transformed. And it's the same for us today. And so many of us are showing a willingness to learn and change and to grow and transform. Today, many of us who are white, we've been delving into and learning more about white privilege, what it means, how we have, benefited from it without even realizing it, how it can create separation. Many people are opening themselves up to learning more about racism, and not just what you might see in a restaurant down the street, but the history of how it got to where we are today, and learning how to change so that they can become anti-racist. People are taking courses on how to have conscious conversations and use nonviolent communication techniques. People are going deeper and deeper and deeper into the complexities of politics to become more aware, more informed, more educated. People are seeking out voices that are different from theirs, taking those steps outside of the bubble that had contained only the familiar and the commonalities. And why is all that happening? Well, from a religious perspective, it's happening because if we don't, then we're rejecting so much of God's creation. I mean, Spirit did not create us all the same. It created diversity. And all that it created, Spirit said it called good. And we do this because at the deepest levels within us, we know that we were not created to live in isolation, that we were meant to live as one, with our differences and our diversity serving as links to keep us strong, not to weaken us and tear us apart. And it's in this inherent knowing that tells us that we must be inherently engaged with the political issues of our time. Martin Luther King Jr. said that each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. We've been moving through issues of basic rights, civil rights, seeing how politics can bring them about for everyone. When it's seen and used as an instrument for good, that instrument for ongoing human development. But that's only one side of the coin. The other side of that coin is to actually play the instrument, make a commitment to our civil obligations. Have you ever heard of the nun on the bus? Maybe you have. Her name is Sister Simone Campbell, and she founded Nuns on the Bus as a Catholic advocacy group. And groups of nuns get on this bus and they travel all over the country and advocate for social justice. And here's how Sister Simone describes the call, our call of civil obligations. She said they call each of us to participate out of a concern and commitment for the whole. For the whole. They call us to vote, to inform ourselves about the issues of the day, to engage in serious conversations about our nation's future, and to learn to listen to various perspectives. She noted that living our civil obligations means everyone Everyone needs to be involved, and there needs to be room for everyone to be involved. We have a very important piece of our democratic system fast approaching, our 2020 elections. People all across this country are preparing. We are preparing to exercise one of the most cherished civil obligations we have. It is clear to me, perhaps to you as well, that the next 3 months are going to be quite a bumpy ride. Quite a bumpy ride. And there is going to be a lot of noise. There's going to be a lot of clamor out there. So I encourage you to go as deeply into your inner world refuge as you possibly can for your times of preparation. And when you get there, close your eyes just for a moment and hear these words being whispered gently to your heart, your soul, your mind, that were spoken, written by our late Congressman, John Lewis. He said, I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. God bless you.